On June 14, 1944, Marine Sergeant Mike Hartley stood before a military tribunal at Pearl Harbor. The charge was theft of United States Navy property. The stolen item was a twin anti-aircraft mount valued at $2,000. The prosecutor called it criminal salvage during combat operations. The defense called it battlefield improvisation that saved American lives. The senior officer on the panel looked at Hartley across the polished table. The sergeant's hands bore scars from steel cables. A fresh piece of shrapnel was still embedded in his left cheek. His service record showed 8 years working blast furnaces at Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania before the war, 3 Pacific campaigns, 0 disciplinary actions until December 26, 1943. The prosecutor stood and asked his question. Did Sergeant Hartley disobey a direct order from his commanding officer to abandon equipment on the beach at Cape Gloucester? Hartley's answer was 2 words: yes, sir. What the tribunal did not know was that 6 months earlier, that stolen gun had broken the back of a Japanese battalion. Over 200 enemy soldiers killed in a single night. 0 Marines lost in Hartley's sector. The weapon everyone called useless had become the most lethal piece of equipment on Target Hill. This is that story. The 1st Marine Division landed at Cape Gloucester on December 26, 1943, as part of Operation Dexterity. The objective was to seize a strategic airfield on the western tip of New Britain Island. The landing craft were LCVP boats, Standard Higgins boats, designed by Andrew Higgins in New Orleans. These vessels carried a crew-served weapon for air defense, typically a twin 30 caliber Browning M1919 mount. The twin mount configuration was standard on Navy landing craft throughout the Pacific theater. What follows is a reconstruction based on after-action reports and oral histories collected from 1st Marine Division veterans. 6 months before the tribunal, December 25, 1943, transport ship approaching New Britain. Mike Hartley could not sleep. He never could the night before a landing. Below decks, the berthing area was packed with Marines trying to grab rest before the chaos. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fuel, gun oil, and sweat. The ship rolled with the Pacific swells. Steel groaned. Men muttered prayers in the darkness. Mike lay in his rack, staring at the rivets in the ceiling above him. He was 27 years old. Ancient by Marine Corps standards, where most riflemen were 19 or 20. His hands were scarred from 8 years of heavy machinery work. His face looked like it had been carved from Pennsylvania granite, but tonight his mind was 13 months in the past. Guadalcanal, November 3rd, 1942. Lunga Ridge, his younger brother Tommy had been 19 years old, a rifleman in the same division, different company. Tommy had the kind of easy smile that made people trust him instantly. He wrote letters home every week telling their mother about the tropical birds, the beautiful sunsets, how the war would be over soon. Tommy never made it home. The Japanese Banzai charge hit his platoon just before dawn. 300 soldiers emerged from the jungle, screaming, bayonets fixed, determined to overrun the Marine line. Tommy's squad had a single 30 caliber machine gun, the M1919A4 model, air-cooled, light barrel designed for mobility. The gunner fired for 90 seconds, then the barrel overheated. The thin metal warped from sustained fire. The gun jammed solid. In the reload gap, those critical 15 seconds, while the assistant gunner desperately tried to clear the malfunction, the wave crashed over the foxholes. Mike arrived 20 minutes later with reinforcements. He found his brother in a fighting hole. The machine gun lay beside him, barrel glowing, dull red in the dawn light. The receiver cracked open where heat had fractured the metal. Mike knelt in the mud and picked up a spent brass casing from the pile around Tommy's body. Still warm, he put it in his pocket, carried it ever since. A reminder carved in metal: light weapons fail, heavy weapons endure. The M1919A4 Browning machine gun was indeed prone to barrel overheating during sustained fire. The air-cooled design required gunners to fire in controlled bursts of 6 seconds maximum, with cooling periods between. During Banzai charges, this doctrine frequently broke down. Gunners would hold triggers until barrels warped. After action reports from Guadalcanal document multiple instances of gun failures during mass attacks. The heavier water-cooled M1917 model, though less mobile, could sustain fire indefinitely. This technical distinction drives Sergeant Hartley's later decision, December 26, 1943. 7:42 in the morning, the Pacific Ocean was trying to kill Mike Hartley. He stood chest-deep in boiling surf, watching his landing craft disintegrate against a coral reef. The LCVP had hit the hidden reef with the violence of a car slamming into a brick wall, steel bottom torn open like cheap tin, ramp jammed halfway down, engine screaming its death song as seawater flooded the compartment. Heavy equipment crates slid off the deck during impact and vanished into dark water. Mortars gone. Machine gun tripods gone. Boxes of grenades sitting on the bottom of the bay. The Marines scrambled over the gunnels and hit the black volcanic sand, coughing up salt water. Alive but naked, just rifles and ammunition belts against an entrenched enemy waiting in the tree line. Mike dragged himself up the beach. Water poured from his boots. Rain hammered down in solid sheets. Not a tropical shower, a deluge deluge that turned the world gray. He looked at his squad. Young men shivering from cold and the sudden understanding of their vulnerability. Lieutenant James Morrison was shouting orders through the rain. Fresh Officer Princeton, educated, 23 years old. Move inland, he yelled. Get off the exposed beach before enemy mortars bracket the position. Equipment is a loss. Move now. It was the sensible order, the by-the-book tactical response. You do not salvage heavy gear from a sinking boat under fire. You cut losses and save lives. Mike Hartley did not move inland. He stopped, turned, looked back at the dying boat listing in the surf. Most men saw a wreck. Mike saw a hardware store. His eyes locked onto the rear of the craft. Bolted to a heavy steel ring mount above the engine compartment was the boat's air defense weapon, a twin .30 caliber mount. 2 Browning machine guns paired side by side, fed by massive ammunition boxes welded to the frame. This weapon was designed to shoot down Zero fighters, traveling 300 miles per hour, industrial-grade violence that could pour lead like water from a fire hose. Morrison saw Hartley staring and screamed at him. The equipment is lost, the lieutenant shouted. We regroup at the rally point. We will find weapons later. Later. Mike knew that later meant never. Up in that jungle, rifles would not stop a Banzai charge. If they went up that hill without heavy weapons, they were walking into a meat grinder with knives. The brass casing in his pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 10 pounds. Tommy died because a gun failed. This gun would not fail. Mike waded back into the surf. 2 men followed him into the water. PFC Luis Garcia, a farm kid from California with shoulders like an ox. PFC Johnson, everyone called him tiny despite being 6'3", a logger from Tennessee who could carry weight. They looked at Mike like he had lost his mind. They were not entirely wrong. The boat was going down fast. Waves smashed the hull against the reef. Each impact threatened to crush anyone nearby. The twin mount sat bolted to its ring with 3-inch industrial bolts rusted shut by months of salt spray. It was never designed to be removed, a permanent fixture welded into the boat's structure like the rudder itself. Mike pulled a heavy wrench from the emergency toolkit, cold, slippery steel in his bleeding hands. He fitted it to the first bolt and pulled with everything he had. Nothing moved. Corrosion had seized the threads completely. Years of rust welding metal to metal. A wave hit. The boat lurched violently left. All 3 men nearly fell. The twin mount swung on its bolts, 200 pounds of pendulum steel that could crush skulls. Garcia shouted that the boat was rolling. They had to leave. Mike braced his feet and pulled. The veins in his neck bulged. His face turned red. The wrench cut into his palms, blood mixed with salt water, then a sound. Deep metallic crack. The first bolt sheared off rusted threads, giving way all at once. He grabbed the wrench again. Second bolt. On the beach, Morrison watched through field glasses. He saw 3 men risking death for equipment that would not even function on land. He saw insubordination, a sergeant who had finally broken under too many landings, too many dead friends. Morrison lowered the glasses and shook his head. When we get back, he told his radio operator, I am recommending Hartley for psychiatric evaluation. The boat was settling deeper, surf reaching the engine compartment 2 minutes before capsizing. Mike worked like a man possessed. Second bolt, crack, third bolt. He threw his body weight onto the wrench. Garcia and Johnson grabbed him, adding their mass. The final bolt gave way with a shriek of overstressed metal. The twin mount broke free. 200 pounds suddenly unsupported. The weight nearly threw them all into the ocean. They scrambled to control it as it slid across the tilting deck, an awkward, jagged lump with no handles, no carrying case, no tripod. Dead weight with sharp edges, eager to cut flesh. They wrestled it over the side, dropped it into shallow water with a massive splash, jumped in after it. Dragging the mount through surf was like dragging a dead animal. It dug into sand, caught on rocks. Waves tried to rip it from their hands. Mike's shoulders screamed, his back cramped. Each step was battle against suction and exhaustion. Garcia gasped that he could not continue much longer. Do not stop, Mike said. We stop, it sinks. They hauled it onto black volcanic sand and collapsed, lungs burning, muscles quivering. The twin mount sat dripping beside them, rusted, covered in barnacles. It looked like scrapyard junk. Morrison walked over, looked at the mount, looked at 3 men bleeding, soaked, covered in grease. The lieutenant's voice was ice. Sergeant Hartley, what exactly do you plan to do with a naval anti-aircraft gun that has no mount, no sights, weighs 200 pounds, and was designed for a ship deck? Mike wiped blood from his hands onto his wet uniform, met Morrison's eyes. I am going to save your life with it, sir. Morrison's jaw tightened. You just disobeyed a direct order in combat. That is grounds for court-martial. Court-martial me after we survive tonight, Lieutenant. The 2 men stared at each other. Around them, other Marines moved past, heading inland. Some glanced at the spectacle and laughed. A passing rifleman shouted, Hey, Sarge, you planning to mount that on your back? Another voice. Hartley is starting his own navy. A corporal from Baker Company. 200 pounds of scrap is going to slow you down real nice when the Japs come. Mike stood, shorter than most of the men mocking him, covered in grease and blood, shivering, but his voice cut through rain like a blade. When the sun goes down and they come out of that jungle, your carbines will run dry in 30 seconds. This gun fires for 30 minutes. We will see who laughs then. He turned to Garcia and Johnson. Strip shirts from the dead crew, clean this weapon, then we carry it up that hill. Morrison walked away, shaking his head. The climb to Target Hill was about to begin. The Marines called Cape Gloucester the Green Inferno. Operation Dexterity involved landing 15,000 men of the 1st Marine Division on terrain that was essentially biological warfare. Annual rainfall exceeded 300 inches. The volcanic clay mud could swallow vehicles. Japanese defenders knew every trail, every approach. The landing itself went relatively smoothly with light casualties, but the subsequent push inland through jungle terrain produced some of the worst conditions Marines would face in the Pacific theater. What follows is the documented struggle to move heavy equipment through this environment. 800 yards of vertical mud, 4 hours until dark, 200 pounds of iron that everyone thought was useless. Mike grabbed the front of the mount. Garcia and Johnson took the rear. Cape Gloucester was not just an island. It was a weapon designed by nature to break men. The rain never stopped, not a drizzle, a solid wall of water that erased the world beyond 10 feet. It filled lungs when you breathed, turned skin gray and wrinkled, washed away sweat and blood and hope in equal measure. The mud was worse. Volcanic clay, thick, black, adhesive. It grabbed boots and refused release. Walking uphill with just a rifle was exhausting. Each step required pulling your foot free with obscene, wet, sucking sounds. Dragging 200 pounds through this was torture. They had no carriage, no wheels, just hands gripping jagged metal edges that cut palms like dull knives. 5 steps forward. The gun would dig into soft earth, anchoring like a plow. They had to rock it, curse it, kick mud away, heave to move it. Another 5 steps, then slip. Slide back 3 steps. 800 yards at this pace meant 4 hours minimum. Sweat poured off them, hot and salty, mixing with cold rain until they were coated in gray slime. Mike's shoulders burned with deep grinding pain radiating down his spine. His hands bled. The cuts from metal edges went through calluses built over 8 years of steel mill work. His lungs felt like they were breathing liquid fire. The humid jungle air was so thick with moisture it barely carried oxygen. Each breath was work. After the first 100 yards, Johnson stopped, dropped his end, bent over, gasping. Sarge, he said, I cannot. This is insane. Mike did not stop pulling. Pick it up, Johnson. We are going to die dragging this thing. Mike finally stopped, turned. His face was gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were iron. My brother died because a light weapon failed him. I am not asking you to understand. I am ordering you to pick up that gun. Corporal Danny Chen walked alongside them carrying ammunition boxes. Chinese-American kid from San Francisco. He had lost his own brother at Wake Island. He spoke quietly. Tommy, Guadalcanal, machine gun jammed during a Banzai charge. Understanding dawned on the younger Marines' faces. This was not about tactical superiority. This was about ghosts. Johnson picked up his end. They kept climbing. As they struggled upward, other units passed them, Marines moving fast with light carbines and Thompson submachine guns. They looked at Mike's team with pity and amusement. The jokes came in waves. Hey, Bull, you going to anchor the whole island with that thing? Catch any fish with that boat anchor, Hartley. An officer from Baker Company stopped his men to point. See that? That is what happens when you do not follow orders. The worst came from a veteran staff sergeant who had been at Guadalcanal. He looked at the gun, looked at Mike, said quietly enough that only Mike could hear, Tommy would not want you killing yourself over junk. Let it go. Mike did not respond, but inside something twisted. Part of him wondered if the sergeant was right, if this was about honoring Tommy or drowning in guilt. He pushed the thought away and kept pulling. Up ahead on the ridge, Morrison was setting defensive positions. He had written Mike off, assigned his squad the worst position on the line. Extreme left flank overlooking dense kunai grass looking straight into jungle, the position where infiltrators would probe first. Morrison figured if Hartley wanted to be a martyr to his boat gun, he might as well do it somewhere that would not compromise the main line. The lieutenant penciled on his map. Hartley, left flank, twin mount, inoperable. He underlined the word inoperable twice. By the time they reached the defensive line, Mike's squad was wrecked. They collapsed in mud, chests heaving, vision swimming, every muscle trembling. 3 hours, 40 minutes to cover 800 yards. The twin mount sat in the dirt, ugly, awkward, completely out of place. A piece of boat stranded in rainforest. Barnacles still clinging to metal, rust streaking the barrels. It looked like junkyard refuse. Morrison walked to their position, looked at the gun, looked at exhausted men. His expression said everything without words. The lieutenant pointed at soft jungle floor. You cannot mount that here, Sergeant. Recoil of twin 30 caliber guns firing simultaneously will flip it over on first trigger pull. Ground is too soft. It was legitimate tactical concern. Mike had been thinking about it for 3 hours during the climb. Morrison continued. Best option is strip the guns off the mount, use them individually as heavy rifles. At least then you would have something functional. No, sir. Sergeant, that is not a suggestion. The power of this weapon is not just bullets, Lieutenant. It is stability. Firing 2 streams of lead at the exact same point without barrel wander. You separate these guns, you lose that. Morrison's jaw tightened. Then what exactly do you plan to do? Wish the mud solid. Mike did not answer immediately. He stared at the ground, calculating. Then he looked up at the ridge, the slope, the trees. His mind was back in Pennsylvania, Bethlehem Steel, building furnace foundations on soft riverbank soil. You do not fight soft ground, you distribute the load. He grabbed an entrenching tool and started digging. Morrison watched for a moment, then walked away, shaking his head. It is your court-martial, Sergeant. Mike carved a shelf into the ridge side. Not a foxhole, a platform. He ordered Garcia and Johnson to cut palm logs, 8-inch diameter, 6-foot lengths. They looked at him with dead eyes, but the expression on his face killed any argument. Danny helped without being asked. They worked side by side, building what Mike called a crib. It was a wooden box. Logs laid horizontally, cross-stacked, creating a frame 4 feet by 4 feet by 3 feet deep. They filled it with sandbags and volcanic rocks, ballast to anchor it to earth. Top layer, more logs laid parallel, creating solid platform. Mike lifted the twin mount, finding strength he should not have possessed, and slammed it onto the wooden frame. Perfect fit. The flat bottom of the naval mount sat flush on logs. Then he used baling wire and telephone cable to lash the base to frame. He wound wire tighter until it sang like a guitar string when plucked. I am recreating the boat, Mike muttered. Building a deck in the middle of mud, Danny understood. Transfer recoil load across the whole crib structure instead of direct into soft ground. Exactly. When finished, the contraption looked ridiculous. A child's fort made of sticks and garbage, but when Mike racked the charging handles, the metallic clack sound was heavy and reassuring. He opened the massive naval ammunition boxes and fed belts into the receivers. Brass cartridges gleamed in fading light, clean and dry, protected by sealed containers, 250 rounds per box, 6 boxes total, 1,500 rounds, enough ammunition to fight a small war. The engineering solution described here is consistent with field improvisation documented throughout the Pacific Campaign. Marines frequently adapted weapons beyond their design parameters. The crib construction using logs and ballast to create a stable firing platform on soft ground follows basic principles of load distribution. Naval ammunition boxes for the M1919 Browning did indeed hold 250 round belts, significantly more than infantry configurations. The twin mount's combined rate of fire would have been approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, far exceeding any infantry weapon available to a Marine rifle squad. The sun dropped behind the ridge, light faded to bruised purple-gray, rain picked up intensity, hammering leaves with deafening white noise. The jungle, which had buzzed with insects and birds all day, suddenly went quiet. Every Marine knew that silence. It meant the predator was awake. Mike sat behind what the squad had started calling the Iron Pig. He wrapped the receiver assembly with dry socks, trying to keep volcanic grit out of moving parts. He rigged a poncho over ammunition boxes, knowing that wet cloth belts could swell and jam feed trays. He was treating cold steel with tenderness he did not show his own men. He knew that in a few hours this ugly, rusted lump of naval salvage would be the only thing keeping the jungle from swallowing them whole. Marines in nearby holes checked rifles and looked nervously at the dark wall of trees. They glanced at the twin mount, then at Mike. For the first time since the beach, nobody was laughing. They were waiting to see if the sergeant's folly would save them or if they would all die guarding shipyard junk. Morrison checked the line, moving from hole to hole, whispering orders to conserve ammunition and hold fire until targets were visible. When he reached Mike's position, he did not speak, just shined his red lens flashlight on the twin mount for 1 second, illuminating massive water cooling jackets and belt feed mechanism, then moved on. The silence was indictment. The officer considered this position a write-off, a gap in the line plugged by stubborn sergeant and boat anchor, but the experts mocking the weapon were missing crucial detail that Mike understood. They were thinking about infantry combat, shoot, move, communicate, precision fire. The twin mount was not designed for precision, it was designed for saturation, built to fill cubic acres of sky with enough lead to shred airplanes made of aluminum and glass. It did not fire in bursts. It fired in streams, and crucially, it was designed to run hot. Infantry machine guns like the air-cooled light .30 calibers the rest of the platoon carried had thin barrels. Fire them for more than a minute and barrels would glow white warp, destroy the gun. The twin mount had heavy, thick-walled barrels designed to dump heat. Industrial tool for industrial job. The enemy they were facing was not interested in fair fights. Japanese troops on Cape Gloucester were veterans. They knew terrain better than Marines knew their own streets back home. Their tactic was the creep. Crawl on bellies through mud, moving inches at a time, sliding under barbed wire like snakes. Get close enough to smell American cigarettes. Toss grenades into foxholes before anyone knew they were there. Psychological terror designed to make Marines afraid of the dark, make them fire wildly at phantoms, and give away positions. At 9 o'clock, the first probe hit the line. It was not a wave, it was a whisper. To the left of Mike's position, a trip flare popped, sizzling and sputtering in rain, casting weird dancing green light over the ridge. In that brief flash of illumination, Marines saw them. 3 Japanese soldiers already inside the wire, 20 feet away, covered in mud uniforms blending perfectly with sludge, not running, sprinting in low crouch, bayonets fixed, heading straight for the machine gun nest on the flank. The Marine in the closest foxhole squeezed the trigger of his Browning automatic rifle. The weapon fired 1 round, crack, then stopped. Mud had gotten into the open bolt, gas piston fouled, gun dead. The Marine frantically racked the slide, trying to clear the jam. Wet sand had turned precision machine steel into a paperweight. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked through the line. The Japanese soldiers saw the jam, accelerated, screaming now, sensing weakness. This was nightmare scenario. Reliable infantry weapons choking on the filth of the island. Mike did not panic, did not fumble with bolt or check safety. He simply leaned his weight into the spade grips of the twin mount. The weapon did not have a trigger like a rifle. It had butterfly paddles you pushed with thumbs. A mechanism requiring intent. Mike slammed his thumbs forward. The sound that erupted from the sandbag crib was not familiar battlefield staccato. It was continuous, tearing roar, like heavy canvas ripped by giant hands. 2 guns firing slightly out of sync created harmonic vibration that drilled into the teeth of every man on the ridge. Muzzle flash was blinding. Dual tongue of flame lighting the immediate area like strobe. Mike did not aim at soldiers, could not track individual men moving that fast in darkness. Instead, he used hose theory, swept guns, laterally dragging stream of tracers across path of attackers. The physics of the twin mount were devastating. A single 30 caliber bullet hits with sledgehammer force. 2 of them arriving milliseconds apart act like buzzsaw. The first Japanese soldier was hit mid-stride. He did not fall, was physically thrown backward. Momentum arrested instantly by kinetic energy. Double stream of lead cut through him and chewed ground behind him. The other 2 infiltrators dove for cover behind fallen log. Against normal riflemen, they would have been safe, could pop up and throw grenades. But the twin mount did not care about cover. Heavy naval ammunition boxes allowed Mike to sustain fire without pause. He did not let up. Walked fire onto the log. Sheer volume of rounds chewed through rotting wood in seconds. Turned cover into cloud of splinters and sawdust. Rounds punched through log and into earth behind it. Screaming stopped. Mike released butterfly triggers. Sudden silence was deafening. Smoke drifted from twin barrels mixing with rain. Entire engagement had lasted less than 8 seconds. In that time, the Iron Pig had spit out more than 200 rounds. Volume of fire a rifle squad could not produce in a minute. The Marine with the jammed Browning automatic rifle looked over at Mike's position. Eyes wide, face pale. He looked at smoking boat gun, then down at his own useless weapon. Mockery was gone. Jokes about scrap metal died the second those triggers pressed. But Mike knew this was just opening move. The probe was a test. Japanese commander out in darkness had sacrificed those 3 men to find heavy weapons. He wanted Marines to reveal positions. Mike had just lit neon sign pointing directly at his sandbag crib. Element of surprise was gone. Enemy now knew exactly where the anchor of defense was located. They knew something on that ridge fired faster and harder than standard machine gun. Morrison crawled to Mike's hole, moving low through mud. He did not yell this time, looked at shredded log and bodies in wire. That thing draws a lot of water, Sergeant, he said quietly. Naval term. Admission of respect. Then he pointed out reality. They know you are here now. Every mortar and grenade launcher they have will be dialed in on this position in 5 minutes. Mike nodded, knew the score, had traded anonymity for violence. Let them come, Lieutenant. I have plenty of belts. He was not being arrogant. Being practical, knew moving 200-pound gun was impossible now. They were committed, bolted to ridge, just like gun had been bolted to boat. Rain picked up again, drumming against helmets. Minutes stretched, 10, 20. Adrenaline from brief firefight began to curdle into dread. Men could hear movement down in ravine now, not stealthy creep of infiltrators, heavy shuffling sound of hundreds of men moving into position. It sounded like river rising. Japanese were massing. They were not going to try sneaking through wire next time. They were going to try to trample it. Mike opened tops of spare ammunition crates, linked end of belt in gun to start of fresh belt, creating continuous chain of brass snaking down into mud. He inspected the barrels after the brief test fire. The right gun's recoil felt slightly off. A vibration he could not quite identify. He ran his hand over the water jacket in the darkness, nothing visible in the dim light, but something felt wrong, a frequency that should not be there. He filed it away. A problem for later, if there was a later. He checked traverse mechanism, greased swivel with glob of motor oil, scavenged earlier. Gun had to swing freely. If it bound even for a second, they were dead. Then the sound came. Not flare or shot, a whistle. Long, mournful note cutting through rain, followed by voice screaming in Japanese amplified by megaphone. A chant, rhythmic and terrifying. Then the jungle floor seemed to detach itself and stand up. Wall of green tracers erupted from tree line focusing on ridge. Air snapped with sound of bullets passing overhead. Mortar rounds began to walk up slope. Explosions throwing geysers of mud and shale into air. Thump crash, explosions getting closer, bracketing position. Morrison was screaming orders, but nobody could hear over roar. Mike did not fire yet. He waited, watched dark shapes emerging from trees at bottom of hill. Dozens of them, no, hundreds. Solid wall of brown uniforms moving up slope. Bayonets gleaming in mortar flashes, screaming Banzai, collective roar drowning out thunder. This was not probe, this was hammer, coming for the gun, coming to kill the man who dared bring ship weapon to knife fight. Mike gripped spade handles, felt vibration of explosions through frame of gun, looked at wave of humanity surging toward him, ignoring tracers, ignoring mud. He took breath, held it. Waited for them to hit kill zone. The Iron Pig was hungry. It was time to feed it. The distance between the Japanese charge and the Marine line was 100 yards of slick volcanic mud. In daylight, a runner could cross it in 12 seconds. In darkness, under weight of combat gear and adrenaline, it was chaotic sprint through minefield of tripping vines and shell craters. The Japanese assault force, screaming their war cry, covered the first 30 yards before the American line even reacted. They were moving with terrifying fluid momentum, a human tide designed to crash over foxholes and drown defenders in hand-to-hand combat. They expected the usual rhythm of resistance, sharp cracks of rifles, short stuttering bursts of light machine guns that would pause every few seconds to reload. They were prepared to absorb casualties, step over fallen, keep running during the silence of reloads. But when Mike Hartley slammed the butterfly triggers of the twin mount forward, the rhythm of battle did not just change, it vanished. The weapon did not stutter, it roared. Two barrels synchronized by mechanics of the heavy mount unleashed a continuous stream of copper jacketed lead that defied the logic of infantry combat. A standard infantry machine gun fires 500 rounds a minute, but in practice it fires much less because the gunner must fire in short bursts to keep barrel from melting. The twin mount was a naval weapon, built to fire long sustained bursts at airplanes moving 300 miles per hour, built to run hot. The effect on the charging wave was catastrophic. The first rank of the Japanese assault simply evaporated. They did not fall individually. They were swept away as if they had run into an invisible waist-high steel cable. The kinetic energy of 1,200 rounds per minute physically pushed the charge backward. Men were lifted off their feet and thrown into men behind them. The momentum of the attack, which had been building for 20 minutes in the ravine, slammed into a wall of physics that it could not break. The scream of Banzai was instantly drowned out by the mechanical scream of the guns. Mike was not aiming. In pitch black of the storm, aiming was impossible. He was painting, gripped the heavy spade handles, and used his entire upper body to swing the mount left and right, traversing a 45-degree arc in front of his position. He was using tracers as paintbrush, covering jungle floor in crisscrossing lattice of green fire, watched stream of light dip and rise, adjusting elevation by instinct, kept fire low. Barely 2 feet off ground, he was using graze fire, skipping rounds off hard mud and rocks. A bullet that hits a man kills one man. A bullet that ricochets off ground, tumbles and fragments, becomes jagged piece of shrapnel tearing through everything in its path. The Japanese soldiers in second and third waves did not know what was happening, could not see the gun, only the blinding strobe light of muzzle flash. They tried to dive for cover, but cover was disintegrating. Heavy 30 caliber rounds were punching through palm trees, shredding undergrowth, turning jungle itself into weapon. Wood splinters the size of steak knives exploded outward from trees, acting like secondary grenades. The air in the kill zone was mixture of lead water and pulverized wood. It was a grinder. Back in the foxhole, the reality of the Iron Pig was becoming clear to rest of squad. The noise was unbearable. Concussion from twin muzzles pounding against chests like physical hammer. But most shocking thing was duration. Normal machine gunner fires for 3 seconds, then stops. Mike held triggers down for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. Belt feed from massive naval ammunition boxes kept running. Brass casings were pouring out of bottom of mount in steady metallic waterfall, piling up around Mike's boots, steaming in rain. Morrison, who had mocked the weapon hours earlier, was now scrambling through mud, dragging crates of ammunition toward gun. He realized entire defensive ridge now hung on this one piece of salvaged junk. Riflemen on the line had stopped firing, could not see targets. knew sticking heads up during the storm of fire was suicide. They stayed low, watching the show, witnessing difference between weapon designed to suppress enemy and weapon designed to delete them. The Japanese Banzai charge was not mindless fanaticism as often portrayed in American propaganda. It was calculated tactical doctrine based on breaking enemy morale through overwhelming mass and ferocity. Japanese commanders understood that American forces relied heavily on firepower superiority. The Banzai charge was designed to close distance rapidly, overwhelm defensive positions during reload gaps, and force hand-to-hand combat where Japanese training in close quarters gave advantage. What Japanese doctrine did not account for was sustained automatic fire at naval rates. The twin mount represented firepower density beyond anything infantry tactics were designed to counter, but the machine was fighting its own battle. Heat was building inside heavy water jackets surrounding barrels. Water was beginning to boil. System was designed to circulate water to keep steel cool, but Mike was pushing it beyond naval specifications, firing continuous stream without pump to cycle fluid. Steam began to hiss from relief valves. High-pitched shriek, cutting through roar of gunfire. Cloud of white vapor erupted around gun-wrapping Mike and Fogbank. This steam was dangerous. It blinded the gunner. Worse, it gave enemy perfect aiming point. Japanese mortar teams in tree line saw white plume rising from ridge. They adjusted their tubes. Seconds later, ground around Mike's position erupted. Mud and rock showered gun crew. Shrapnel pinged off heavy steel shield of mount. Piece of hot metal sliced across Mike's cheek. Blood mixed with oil and sweat on his face. He did not flinch, did not let go of triggers. He knew if he stopped firing to wipe his face, the wall would fall. Japanese would be in hole with knives. He shouted at riflemen nearest him. He needed water. Jackets were boiling dry. If water evaporated completely, barrels would warp. Rifling would strip out, gun would jam. The men scrambled, grabbing canteens. They crawled up to steaming gun, unscrewing caps, pouring precious drinking water into filler ports on top of jackets. Water hit superheated metal and sizzled, flashing instantly into more steam, but it bought gun another minute of life. Desperate, chaotic pit stop in middle of slaughter. 1,000 yards away, Captain Ichiro Tanaka knelt in his command post carved into hillside, overlooking the battle. He was 34 years old, veteran of Shanghai and Malaya, professional soldier who had fought Chinese, British, now Americans. He watched the white steam plume rising from the Marine position through field glasses, watched his men die in waves against something that should not exist. Tanaka had planned this assault carefully. Standard doctrine. Mass attack to overwhelm. His intelligence said Americans had light weapons, rifles, maybe 1 or 2 machine guns per platoon, guns that would overheat and jam after sustained fire. His plan was simple. First wave absorbs the fire, draws out the guns. Second wave hits during reload. Third wave finishes it, but there was no reload. That gun on the ridge kept firing. 10 seconds, 20, 30, 40, a full minute of continuous fire. It was impossible. Tanaka lowered his field glasses. In his pocket was a photograph of his wife and daughter in Tokyo. He had written them a letter before the attack. Tradition before battle, he had told them he would do his duty for the emperor. But watching his men die against industrial machinery, Tanaka felt something he had not felt since Shanghai. Doubt. This was not combat, this was execution. He turned to his second in command. We cannot break that gun with mass, he said quietly. We need grenaders, suicide squad. Get under the gun's depression angle. The lieutenant bowed and moved into darkness to select volunteers. Tanaka looked back at the ridge, at the steam rising, at the green tracers cutting horizontal through rain. Somewhere in his mind, he wondered if this was how war would be from now on. Not soldiers against soldiers, but soldiers against machines. The thought made him feel very old. Morrison crawled through mud to Mike's position, moved low, stayed below trajectory of fire. When he reached the sandbag crib, he did not speak immediately. He looked at the shredded jungle, the bodies piled in rows like cordwood, the empty brass casings filling the bottom of the foxhole knee-deep. He looked at Mike, face covered in blood and oil, hands locked on spade grips, eyes focused on the kill zone with intensity that was almost religious. Morrison had to shout to be heard over the gun. That thing draws a lot of water, Sergeant. It was naval term. Recognition between men who understood ships. An admission that the weapon was performing beyond expectation. Mike did not look away from his field of fire, just nodded. Morrison continued, They know where you are now. Every mortar they have will be targeting this position. Let them come, Mike said. I have plenty of belts. Morrison looked at the ammunition crates, looked at the gun, looked at the wooden crib that should not be holding, but was. 8 hours earlier, he had been ready to court-martial this sergeant. Had thought Mike was broken, suffering from combat fatigue, making dangerous, irrational decisions. Now Morrison understood. Hartley had not been irrational. He had been right. The lieutenant's academy training had taught him mobility fire and maneuver tactical flexibility, all the doctrine written by men who had never stood in volcanic mud while hundreds of enemies charged through darkness. Mike Hartley had learned in steel mills and on Guadalcanal ridges, had learned that sometimes survival is not about being smart or fast. Sometimes it is about being immovable, about having more metal between you and death than the other man. Morrison reached into his pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, tapped one out, handed it to Mike. Mike finally looked at him, took the cigarette with bloody hand. Morrison lit it. It was small gesture, but in the Marine Corps it meant something. It meant respect earned. It meant the chain of command acknowledging it had been wrong. "I should have trusted you earlier," Sergeant Morrison said quietly. Mike took drag on cigarette, exhaled smoke that mixed with steam from gun. "Trust me now, sir, when they come for real." Morrison nodded, crawled back to his position. But both men knew the truth. The Japanese were not finished. The probe had failed. The Banzai charge had broken against the gun, but there were other ways to kill a machine. During brief lull in firing, Mike ran his hand over the water jackets. His fingers were trained from 8 years working machinery. He could feel stress in metal the way a doctor feels a pulse. The right barrel's jacket was vibrating wrong, not the smooth hum of circulation, a higher frequency, like something loose inside. He looked closer. In the darkness, illuminated only by distant mortar flashes, he saw it. Hairline crack running vertical along the seam of the water jacket. His stomach dropped. The sustained fire and heat stress had opened a flaw in the metal. Water was seeping out, slow leak, drop by drop into the mud. Mike did mental calculation. At current leak rate, maybe 15 minutes of sustained fire before jacket was empty. Without water, barrel would glow red hot. Steel would warp. Rifling would strip. Gun would jam, or worse, barrel could rupture, explode, kill everyone in the foxhole. He had two choices. Tell Morrison, risk the lieutenant ordering gun abandoned, leaving them defenseless against next assault, or stay silent. Hope he could keep water flowing. Hope the crack did not worsen. Mike looked at Danny Chen crouched nearby. Danny saw his expression, saw him looking at the jacket. Danny crawled closer. "What is wrong, crack in the water jacket?" Mike said quietly. "Right barrel, slow leak." Danny looked at the crack, looked at Mike. "How long do we have?" 15 minutes of sustained fire, maybe. Danny was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "I will fill every canteen. Keep them ready. We feed it water fast as it leaks." Mike gripped Danny's shoulder. "Do not tell the others. Do not tell Morrison. They need to believe this gun is invincible." Danny nodded again, moved into darkness to gather canteens. Mike looked back at the crack. It was wider now, definitely wider. Heat cycling was making it grow. He checked his watch, 2100 hours, 9 p.m. First probe at 20:05. First sustained fire at 2012. Main assault would come soon. Had to come soon. Japanese would not wait all night. They would hit hard before dawn while darkness still gave them cover. Mike had maybe one more sustained fire cycle before the barrel failed, one more chance to break their attack. After that, he would be firing on borrowed time, every second risking catastrophic failure. The brass casing from Guadalcanal was still in his pocket. He touched it through the wet fabric. Tommy died because a gun failed. This gun would not fail. Mike would not let it. Even if he had to pour water into it with his bare hands while it melted, even if the barrel split and sprayed molten metal, he would keep it firing until the Japanese broke or until it killed him. There was no third option. Down in the ravine, 10 Japanese soldiers were strapping explosives to their chests. They were volunteers, men who had already written final letters home, men who understood they would not see sunrise. Their mission was simple: crawl through the field of dead, use bodies as cover, get under the gun's maximum depression angle, the dead space directly in front of the muzzle where barrels could not aim low enough, throw grenades into the nest, destroy the gun, die in the process. It was not Banzai charge, it was assassination. Surgical strike to remove the weapon, terrorizing the assault. The youngest was 19. Farm boy from Hokkaido, he tied the explosive satchel tight across his chest. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline. The oldest was 36, platoon sergeant, father of 3. He checked each man's equipment personally, made sure grenades were accessible, made sure satchel charges would detonate. He spoke to them quietly. "You are already dead. You died the moment you volunteered. Everything after this is gift to Emperor. Make it count." They blackened their faces with mud, checked that bayonets were secured, grenades ready, then they crawled out into darkness, moving toward the steam plume rising from the ridge, moving toward Mike Hartley's gun. Time became elastic. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound was magnified. Rain hitting leaves sounded like drums. Distant voices in Japanese carried on wind. Marines in foxholes fidgeted with equipment, checked magazines, recounted grenades, anything to keep hands busy, keep mind from imagining what was crawling through darkness toward them. Mike sat motionless behind the gun. His hands rested on spade grips, thumbs near butterfly triggers. Eyes scanning the dark wall of jungle, he could feel the gun under his hands, feel the heat radiating through metal, feel the slight vibration of the crack propagating through the water jacket. The machine was dying slowly. Heat stress fracturing metal at molecular level. Every minute the crack grew wider, every minute more water leaked out. Mike opened the filler cap and looked inside with red lens flashlight. Water level was down 2 inches from where it should be. In 20 minutes it had lost that much. He closed the cap, said nothing. Garcia was cleaning his rifle for the third time, hands shaking slightly. Kid was 19, first real combat. The probe earlier had rattled him. Now waiting for the real assault, he looked like he might break. Mike spoke quietly. Garcia. The kid looked up. Yeah, Sarge. You did good earlier, hauling this gun up here. Took guts. Garcia tried to smile, but it came out wrong. Just following orders, Sarge. No, Mike said. You followed me when you thought I was crazy. That takes more than guts. That takes faith. What if you are crazy? Garcia asked. Voice small. Mike looked at the gun, at the crack seeping water, at the bodies piled in front of their position. Then we are all crazy together, he said. And crazy is what wins wars. Johnson was praying quietly in his hole. Mike could hear fragments. Lord, protect us. Lord, give us strength. Lord, let me see home again. Mike did not interrupt. He had stopped praying after Tommy died, figured if God was listening, he would have saved a 19-year-old kid who never hurt anyone. But he did not begrudge Johnson his faith, whatever got you through the night. Danny appeared out of darkness, 4 canteens filled with water, 2 more being filled by other squad members. Mike nodded, placed them within easy reach of the gun. How bad is the crack? Danny whispered. Worse, Mike said. Growing. Will it hold? Has to. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. Danny was quiet. Then he spoke carefully. If it fails, if barrel ruptures during fire, we all die. Mike looked at him. I know. And you are still going to fire it. I am still going to fire it. Why? Because if I do not fire it, we die anyway. At least this way we take them with us. Danny considered this, nodded slowly. Your brother would be proud. Mike felt something tighten in his chest. He did not trust his voice, just nodded. Somewhere in the darkness a branch snapped. Every Marine froze. Another sound, wet sliding, like something heavy being dragged through mud. Mike's hands tightened on the grips. They were coming. The grenaders moved like ghosts, not walking, flowing, bellies pressed into mud, inching forward, using every depression in ground, every pile of bodies, every fallen log. The youngest one, the farm boy from Hokkaido, was in the lead, his heart hammered against the explosive satchel on his chest. Every breath was conscious effort, slow, controlled, no panting that would give him away. He could see the American position now 30 yards away. The sandbag wall, the wooden crib, the twin barrels pointing into darkness. Steam still rose from the gun, but less now, like the machine was catching its breath, waiting. 25 yards, he could hear American voices, low, urgent whispers, could not understand words but recognized tone. Fear and determination mixed together. 20 yards, movement to his left, another grenader crawling parallel. The platoon sergeant. Older man's face was set like stone. He had done this before. Shanghai. Night attacks against Chinese positions. He knew the rhythm. Get close. Throw fast. Die quickly. 15 yards. The farm boy's hand found the grenade on his belt. Type 97 fragmentation. He hooked finger through pin. Did not pull yet. Wait until 10 yards. Wait until you cannot miss. Behind the gun, Mike saw them. Not shapes, just wrongness. Patches of darkness that moved against the pattern of jungle. 6, no 8, maybe 10. Crawling toward the dead space directly in front of his position, he tried to depress the barrels, push down on the grips, the muzzles lowered, hit the wooden logs of the crib. Maximum depression reached. He could not aim lower. The crawling shapes were entering the zone where his gun could not touch them. 10 yards now. Mike's mind raced through options. Rifles. Too inaccurate in darkness. Grenades. Too far to throw accurately. Get out of hole and shoot down at them. Expose himself to fire from tree line. All bad options. The grenaders were pulling pins. He could hear the small metallic clink. Getting ready to throw. 5 seconds until grenades flew. Mike looked at the gun, at the crack in the water jacket, at the wooden crib underneath. Then he understood. He took his thumbs off the butterfly triggers, grabbed the heavy rear handles of the mount. 200 pounds of steel, and lifted. The rear of the mount came up off the traverse bar. The whole weapon pivoted forward on the front pintle point. The muzzles, which had been parallel to ground, now pointed straight down into mud directly in front of the sandbags. Mike aimed at the earth 5 feet from his own position. He slammed the triggers forward. The sound was apocalyptic. Bullets did not fly through air. They impacted mud directly. Instant explosions of earth and volcanic rock. The rounds dug a trench in the clay, spraying geyser of wet, heavy sludge forward, but they also ricocheted. Copper jackets stripped off at impact. Lead cores fragmented into dozens of pieces. Mike was creating a shotgun blast of dirt and metal right in the faces of the crawling grenaders. The effect was immediate and gruesome. The farm boy from Hokkaido was hit by a wall of supersonic debris, rock fragments and bullet pieces traveling at rifle velocity. His face disappeared. The grenade he was holding dropped into mud. 2 seconds later, it detonated. The explosion triggered the satchel charge on his chest. That explosion triggered the grenader next to him. Chain reaction across the whole suicide squad. The ground in front of the gun heaved, multiple explosions overlapping. Smoke and body parts and mud flew into the air in a fountain of violence. The blast wave hit the sandbag crib, nearly knocked Mike off his feet. His ears rang, could not hear anything except high-pitched whine. But when smoke cleared, the dead space was empty. The threat was neutralized. Mike released the triggers, let the rear of the mount settle back onto the traverse bar. His arms were shaking, not from weight, from what he had just done. He had turned the gun into a garden hose and sprayed the ground itself. It was not in any manual, not in any doctrine, pure improvisation born of desperation. Morrison had seen it from his position, crawled over through the smoke. His face was white. What in hell was that? Sergeant Mike wiped mud from his face. That was the sound of running out of options, sir. Morrison looked at the cratered ground in front of the position, at the pieces of what used to be men. He looked at Mike with something approaching awe. "You just saved us again," he said quietly. Mike shook his head, checked the water jacket. The crack had opened wider from the stress of the ground shot. Water was streaming out now, not drops. A steady trickle. "I just bought us time," he said, "maybe 10 minutes. Then this gun dies and we die with it." Morrison's expression changed. "What are you talking about?" Mike showed him the crack, explained the water loss, explained that barrel would fail catastrophically if it ran dry. The lieutenant was quiet for a long moment. "Can you keep it firing?" he finally asked. Mike looked at the gun, at the crack, at the darkness beyond where hundreds more Japanese soldiers waited. Tommy's ghost stood beside him in the steam. "I can keep it firing," Mike said, "until there is nothing left to fire." Morrison nodded. "Then do it. I will get every canteen in the company. We will feed it water until we run out or they run out." He crawled away shouting orders. Mike sat back down behind the gun, placed his hands on the grips. The metal was hot enough to burn through his gloves. Danny appeared with more canteens, poured water into the filler port. It hissed and steamed, disappeared into the superheated metal. "How much longer?" Danny asked. Mike did not answer because he did not know. In the tree line, Captain Tanaka watched the grenader attack fail, watched his best men die in explosions of their own making. He had one option left: full assault. Every man. Overwhelm the position through sheer mass. Accept the casualties. Break that gun or die trying, he gave the order. 400 men stood up in the darkness. The whistle blew. The real attack was beginning. The whistle cut through the rain like a scream. Then the jungle came alive. 400 voices roaring Banzai in unison. Not a word. A collective howl that turned individual men into single organism. The sound was designed to freeze blood, to make defenders panic and fire wildly into darkness. Mike did not panic. He waited. The dark mass of humanity surged up the slope. Bayonets catching flashes of mortar fire, boots churning mud. They came in a wave 100 yards wide, too many to count, too many to stop with rifles. They covered the first 20 yards before Morrison gave the order to fire. The Marine line erupted, M1 rifles cracking, carbines chattering, the lone functioning BR spitting short bursts. Tracers cut red and green lines through darkness. Japanese soldiers fell, but more kept coming, stepping over bodies, filling gaps. The wave did not slow. 50 yards from the Marine foxholes, Mike's hands rested on the spade grips, thumbs near the butterfly triggers. He was tracking the front edge of the assault, waiting for the perfect moment. 40 yards, the other Marines were firing as fast as they could work bolts. Magazines emptying, reloading, the sound was continuous, crackling like a forest fire, but it was not enough. 30 yards. Mike slammed his thumbs forward. The Iron Pig spoke. The twin barrels erupted in continuous roar that drowned out every other sound on the ridge, the familiar tearing canvas sound magnified by desperation. Mike was no longer conserving ammunition, no longer firing controlled bursts. He held the triggers down and swept the gun in wide arcs. The effect on the charge was immediate and total. The leading edge of the wave simply ceased to exist. 20 men deleted in the first 3 seconds. The double stream of 30 caliber fire cut horizontal through the mass at waist height. Bodies did not fall gracefully. They were smashed backward by kinetic force, thrown into the men behind them. Mike traversed left, held for 2 seconds, bodies piled up, traversed right, held, more bodies. He was not aiming at individuals. He was aiming at the concept of the charge itself, breaking the momentum, destroying the psychology that made Banzai work. The Japanese doctrine relied on overwhelming defenders during reload gaps. But there were no gaps. The belt feed ran continuous. The naval ammunition boxes held reserves that seemed infinite. Brass casings poured from the gun in a golden stream. They filled the bottom of the foxhole, climbed up around Mike's boots. The pile grew to his ankles, then his shins. The heat was incredible. Steam erupted from the water jackets in dense white clouds. The crack in the right barrel's jacket was now a split. Water was not trickling anymore. It was spraying out under pressure. Boiling water turning instantly to steam. Danny appeared at Mike's elbow with a canteen, unscrewed the filler cap, poured water in. The metal was so hot, the water flash boiled before it could even reach the barrel. More steam erupted. "The gun needs more," Danny shouted over the roar. It is running dry. Mike did not stop firing, did not look away from the kill zone. Keep pouring, he shouted back. Two more Marines crawled to the position with canteens. They formed a relay, pouring water into the filler port as fast as they could unscrew caps. The gun drank it all, consumed it, turned it to steam that made the position look like a locomotive running at full throttle. The Japanese kept coming. They had committed everything to this assault. 400 men, veterans from Shanghai and Manchuria, men who had fought Chinese armies and British colonial forces, men who believed in victory or death with no middle ground, but they were dying. The pile of bodies at the base of the slope grew from a scatter to a heap to a wall. The living had to climb over the dead to advance. And when they climbed, they exposed themselves to the gun. Mike cut them down on the slope of corpses. The tracers drew lines through darkness. Where the lines touched, men fell. 20 yards from the Marine line now, close enough that Mike could see faces in the muzzle flash. Young faces, terrified faces, determined faces, men who had mothers and brothers and lives that were ending in volcanic mud 8,000 miles from home. Part of Mike's mind registered the humanity of the men he was killing. The rest of his mind was pure function. Traverse left, fire, traverse right, fire, adjust elevation, keep the stream low, use ricochet, maximize casualties. He had become the gun. Or the gun had become him. There was no separation anymore between man and machine. The barrels began to glow. Even through the steam, Mike could see it. Dull red luminescence inside the water jackets. The steel was approaching failure temperature. The crack in the right jacket was now a rupture. The entire side of the jacket had split open. Water poured out freely. The barrel inside was exposed to air. No cooling. Just naked steel subjected to continuous fire. It was going to fail. Question was only when. Garcia appeared with the last canteens. Only 3 left, he shouted. Mike did not respond, just kept firing. The Japanese were 15 yards away now. Front rank was close enough to throw grenades. Mike saw arms cocking back, saw the distinctive shape of Type 97 fragmentation grenades. He elevated the gun slightly, aimed at the throwers, cut them down before they could release. Grenades fell short, exploded among their own men 10 yards. The assault was breaking. Mike could feel it. The wave was not advancing anymore. It was pressing forward against the fire, but not gaining ground. Men were going to ground, seeking cover. The momentum was gone, but they had not retreated yet, had not broken completely. Mike needed them to run, needed them to understand that this position could not be taken, that the cost was too high. He traversed the full 45-degree arc, left to right and back again, continuous sweeping fire. The jungle in front of his position was being clear-cut by bullets, trees falling, brush disintegrating, the ground itself being chewed up and thrown into the air. The gun was screaming now, not just the roar of firing, a higher-pitched metallic shriek from inside the mechanism. Metal grinding on metal, parts expanding from heat beyond their tolerance. The right barrel's rifling was stripping out. Mike could feel it in the recoil. The barrel was no longer spinning bullets properly. They were tumbling. Accuracy was degrading, but accuracy did not matter at this range. Volume mattered. Noise mattered. The psychological impact of unstoppable fire mattered. Then the return spring on the right gun broke. The rate of fire from that barrel dropped immediately. The harmonic rhythm of the twin guns firing, slightly out of sync, changed. Now it was uneven, stuttering. Mike could feel the gun dying under his hands. The water jackets were empty, both barrels glowing red hot. The left barrel was warping. He could see it bending slightly. The heat was destroying the precision that made the weapon function. 5 minutes left, maybe less. The Japanese were falling back now, not running, conducting fighting retreat, dragging wounded, covering each other, but they were going backward. Mike kept firing, chasing them, pouring fire into the tree line they were melting back into. He needed them to stay gone, needed them to report back to their commander that the position was impregnable, that attacking again would be suicide. 4 minutes. The left barrel warped further. Rounds were no longer going where Mike aimed. They were spraying wild, some hitting high, some low. Mike realized with sudden clarity that he was firing blind. The gun was so damaged now it was just throwing metal in approximately the right direction. But the Japanese did not know that. They just knew the gun was still firing, still deadly. 3 minutes. The crack in the left water jacket appeared, smaller than the right, but growing fast. Steam erupted from both sides of the gun now. The position looked like it was on fire. Danny grabbed Mike's shoulder. "We have to stop," he shouted. "The gun is going to explode." Mike shook his head. "Not yet. It is going to kill us. Better than letting them kill us." 2 minutes. Both barrels were bent now, visibly warped. The trajectories were completely unpredictable. Mike was essentially firing into the air and hoping physics put rounds somewhere useful. But he noticed something. The wild shots were going high, over the heads of the retreating Japanese. The warped barrels were aiming above the target zone. Mike had a choice. Stop firing now. Save the gun from catastrophic failure. Let the Japanese retreat unmolested or keep firing. Let the broken barrels shoot over their heads. Let them escape. He kept his thumbs on the triggers, but the fire was no longer deadly. It was cover, suppressive fire that let the Japanese fall back without pursuit. Mike was granting mercy without admitting it. The failing gun was creating an accidental humanitarian gesture. 1 minute, the right barrel's feed system jammed. Brass case stuck in the chamber. That gun fell silent. Only the left barrel firing now. Slow, labored, thump, thump, thump. 30 seconds. The ammunition belt ran out. Mike felt the gun try to cycle on an empty chamber. Click, click, click. He released the triggers. The sudden silence was so profound it felt like pressure on the eardrums. Smoke drifted from the barrels. Steam rose in thick columns. The metal ticked and pinged as it began to cool. Mike slumped forward, rested his forehead on the hot receiver. His hands were locked in claws around the grips. He could not uncurl his fingers. His arms trembled. His back spasmed. His lungs felt like they were full of acid. He was gasping for air, inhaling thick smoke that tasted of burned gunpowder and scorched metal and something else, something organic and terrible that he did not want to identify. He looked down. Brass casings had climbed to his knees, a glittering golden drift that marked every trigger pull. Each casing represented a bullet. Each bullet represented a calculation of physics and death. 4,000 rounds fired in 20 minutes, the sustained fire rate that should have been impossible. That was impossible for any infantry weapon. But the Iron Pig had not been infantry weapon. It had been a piece of industrial machinery, and industry had won. The sunrise on December 27th did not look like sunrise. It looked like a bruise spreading across the eastern sky. Gray light filtered through remaining canopy, revealing a scene that looked less like military victory and more like natural disaster. The rain had finally stopped. Heavy, humid mist clung to the ground. In the silence of morning, Marines slowly stood up in their holes. They were ghosts, skin wrinkled from 20 hours submerged in water, eyes sunken deep, moving with stiffness of old men, joints locked by cold and adrenaline and exhaustion. They wiped mud from their faces and looked over the parapet. What they saw stopped breath in their throats. The jungle in front of Mike's position was gone. The dense wall of vegetation that had obscured vision the day before had been erased. For a width of 50 yards and depth of 100 yards, everything was cut to knee height. It looked like a giant lawnmower had been pushed down the hill. Trees thick as telephone poles were sheared in half. Stumps pointed at the sky like broken fingers. The ground was churned into slurry of mud and wood chips, but the human cost told the real story. The Japanese assault force lay where they had fallen, not scattered randomly, arranged in waves. The first wave piled at the 80-yard mark, the second wave at 50 yards. The final desperate push lay just 10 feet from the gun muzzles, bodies stacked 3 deep in places. Testament to Imperial Army discipline and the terrifying efficiency of the twin mount. Morrison walked down the line, inspecting positions. He looked like he had aged a decade overnight. When he reached Mike's crib, he stopped. He looked at the gun, blackened, smoking, both barrels visibly warped. The water jackets split open like burst pipes. Paint completely burned off, leaving discolored metal. The whole weapon sat in a pile of brass casings so deep it buried the bottom of the wooden logs. Morrison stepped into the hole. His boots crunched on empty shells. The sound of survival counted in spent cartridges. He looked at Mike, sitting on an ammunition crate, trying to clean grease from his hands with a rag. Failing. Morrison reached into his pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, tapped one out, handed it to Mike, then lit it. Small gesture. But in the Marine Corps, it was knighthood. Admission that the chain of command had been wrong and the guy with the wrench had been right. The junk Morrison had ordered abandoned on the beach had just saved the entire company from being overrun. Neither man spoke. There were no words adequate for what had happened on this ridge. Morrison just nodded once, then walked away to begin casualty count and after action reports. The official body count in Mike's sector would be confirmed at 207 enemy soldiers. A single gun manned by a stubborn sergeant and fed by scavenged naval ammunition had broken a battalion-sized attack. 0 Marines killed in the immediate area, 3 wounded by mortar fragments, all expected to survive. The mathematics of the exchange were almost incomprehensible. 1 weapon, 4,000 rounds, 200 casualties, a ratio that should not exist in infantry combat. But the Iron Pig had not been infantry weapon. It had been something else, a piece of industrial America transplanted to jungle warfare. Proof that sometimes overwhelming firepower is the only answer to overwhelming numbers. In the days following Target Hill, the story spread through 1st Marine Division like wildfire. Marines from other companies trekked through mud just to see the gun. They wanted to touch the barrels, run their hands over the cooling jackets, marvel at the pile of brass. They needed to see physical evidence that the story was true. The Iron Pig became a totem, a good luck charm, symbol of American ingenuity and stubbornness. Other units began scouring beach wrecks looking for their own salvageable weapons, trying to replicate Mike's success. The division ordnance officer had to issue orders prohibiting unauthorized removal of Navy equipment after 3 more landing craft were stripped of their guns. Mike Hartley had started a trend, proven that in jungle warfare, portability was luxury you could not afford. Firepower was survival, but the gun itself was finished. The barrels were shot out, rifling worn smooth, return springs fused. It had given its life for the ridge. The Marines would not leave it behind. When the division moved out, pushing deeper into the island to take the airfield, they welded the broken gun to the back of a half-track, used it as mascot, symbol of the improviser spirit that defined the Pacific War. 1st Marine Division took Cape Gloucester Airfield on December 30th, 1943. The campaign continued until mid-January 1944, with total Marine casualties of 1,347, including 310 killed. Japanese forces lost approximately 4,700 killed, with unknown wounded. The use of salvaged naval weapons by infantry was noted in after-action reports and led to development of dedicated heavy machine gun platoons. Twin 30-caliber mounts did see limited use in fixed defensive positions throughout remainder of Pacific campaign, though never again with the dramatic results of Target Hill. The tribunal convened on June 14, 1944. Morrison testified for 3 hours, showed photographs of the bodies, read the casualty report, 0 Marines lost in Hartley's sector, 207 enemy killed. The prosecutor tried to argue regulations. Morrison cut him off. Regulations, sir. That man saved 200 American lives with initiative and a wrench. If that is criminal, then I do not understand the Marine Corps anymore. The panel deliberated for 11 minutes. Charges dismissed. No court-martial, no reprimand. Mike walked out of the tribunal room, a free man. Morrison was waiting outside with 2 cigarettes. They stood in silence, smoking. Watching the harbor traffic, neither man felt the need to speak. Finally, Morrison said quietly, "The division recommended you for Silver Star after Cape Gloucester. You declined it." Mike nodded. "Gun did the work, not me. They gave you Bronze Star at Okinawa instead for different actions." Mike said nothing. Okinawa was not something he talked about. Different ghosts there. Morrison finished his cigarette, ground it out carefully. "You know what I learned from you, Hartley?" "What is that, sir?" "That sometimes the book is wrong. Sometimes the stubborn sergeant with a wrench knows more than the whole damn academy." Mike almost smiled. Brass does not like hearing that. No, but Brass was not on that ridge. Morrison walked away. Mike never saw him again after that day. Heard later that Morrison made captain. Stayed in after the war. Taught tactics at Quantico for 20 years. Retired as colonel in 1965. Mike wondered if Morrison ever told his students about the boat gun. About the sergeant who stole Navy property and built a deck in the mud. Probably not. Some lessons could not be taught in classrooms. Sergeant Mike Hartley survived Cape Gloucester. Survived Peleliu in September 1944, where the 1st Marine Division suffered 30% casualties, taking an island that had questionable strategic value. Survived Okinawa in spring 1945, where the fighting was so brutal that men stopped counting days and started counting hours. He went home in October 1945. Quiet man with ribbons in his pocket and shrapnel scar in his cheek. He did not become a general or run for office or write a memoir. He went back to Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania, back to the blast furnaces and heavy machinery, back to work that involved gears and grease and heat, work he understood. His neighbors knew him as the guy who could fix your lawnmower with a paperclip and determination, the man with a garage full of useful junk his wife wanted him to throw away, but he never did. Because he knew that someday that junk might be the only thing that worked. He rarely spoke about the war. When people asked what he did in the Marines, he said he was in supply, helped move equipment, technical truth that avoided the whole story. He did not tell them about the night on Target Hill, did not describe the feeling of butterfly triggers vibrating against his thumbs, or the sound of steam screaming from water jackets, or the sight of bodies stacked like cordwood in front of his position. That was private memory. Dark room kept locked. He married in 1947, had 3 children, worked the steel mill for 32 years until the plant closed in 1977, retired with modest pension, spent his days fishing and fixing things and not talking about December 26, 1943. In May 1987, Mike Hartley received an envelope from Japan. He was 71 years old, living in a small house in Pennsylvania. His wife had died 2 years earlier. His children were grown with families of their own. He spent most days alone with his memories and his junk collection and the brass casing from Guadalcanal that still sat in a drawer after 45 years. The envelope had Japanese stamps, return address in Tokyo. He opened it carefully with arthritic hands. Inside was a letter written in careful English. "Dear Mr. Hartley, my name is Saburo Yamamoto. I was a private in the Imperial Japanese Army 2nd Infantry Regiment. On December 26, 1943, I was part of the attack on American positions at Cape Gloucester. I survived that night. I do not know how. I remember running up that hill. I remember the terrible sound of your gun. I remember falling, waking hours later among the dead. For many years, I believed American forces had special weapons given by their gods, weapons that could not be stopped. This belief haunted me. Recently, I met an American historian researching the Cape Gloucester campaign. He told me about the twin mount, about the Marine sergeant who salvaged it from a wrecked boat, about how it was not a special weapon at all, just a stubborn man and a piece of machinery. I needed to write to you to say that I was there, that I felt the terror of that gun, but also to say something else. At the end, when we were retreating, your fire lifted. It went high over our heads. You let us go. I have wondered for 43 years if this was mercy or accident. I need to know. Why did you show mercy? The letter was signed with a shaking hand. Mike sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Rain fell outside. Pennsylvania rain. Gentle compared to Cape Gloucester, he could hear it pattering on the roof. He picked up a pen, began to write. Dear Mr. Yamamoto, thank you for your letter. I am glad you survived that night. You ask if I showed mercy. I will tell you the truth. The gun's water cooling system failed during sustained fire. Both barrels warped from heat. By the end, they were bent. Rounds were no longer going where I aimed them. They were shooting high. I knew this. I could have stopped firing, let you retreat in safety, but I kept my thumbs on the triggers, kept firing even though the barrels were broken, because I needed you to keep running, needed you to report back that our position could not be taken. So to answer your question, it was not mercy. It was physics. The barrels warped, and I used that warp to achieve my tactical objective. If they had been firing true, I would have killed you. But I am glad they were not true. I am glad you survived. The war is over. We were both young men following orders. What happened on that ridge was not personal. It was just metal and mud and fear. I hope you found peace after the war. I hope your family is well. I still have nightmares about that night, about the sound the gun made, about the bodies in the morning light, about my brother who died because a gun failed. Maybe we are both haunted by the same ghosts. Respectfully, Mike Hartley. He mailed the letter the next day, never received a response, did not know if Yamamoto got it or what he thought, but writing it had lifted something, a weight Mike had carried for 43 years without acknowledging. The admission that the mercy moment had been physics, not compassion, that even his humanity had been mechanical, but the result was the same. Men had lived who might have died. The reason mattered less than the outcome. Danny Chen survived the war, became a police officer in San Francisco. He and Mike exchanged Christmas cards until 1995. Danny's last card said simply, "You taught me that stubborn beats smart." Thanks, Sarge. Through Yamamoto's letter, Mike learned that Captain Tanaka had also survived, became a school teacher in Kyoto, never spoke about the war, died in 1979. Two men who had tried to kill each other on a muddy ridge, both choosing peace afterward. Mike Hartley died in his sleep on January 15th, 1995. He was 79 years old, small obituary in the local paper, World War II veteran, steel worker, community member, survived by 3 children and 7 grandchildren. No mention of Target Hill, no mention of the Iron Pig, no mention of 200 enemy soldiers stopped by 1 salvaged gun. The specific details were lost, buried with the man who lived them. But the principle endured. Somewhere in Pentagon archives or Marine Corps historical files, there is a dusty report titled After Action Analysis, Cape Gloucester, December 1943. Section 7, paragraph 12, improvised heavy weapons employment. It describes an unnamed sergeant who salvaged a naval weapon and used engineering knowledge to create a firing platform on unsuitable terrain. It notes the defensive success, recommends further study of heavy weapons adaptation for jungle warfare. Dry technical language that strips away the rain and the fear and the steam and the bodies, reduces 20 minutes of violence to data points and lessons learned. The men who teach small unit tactics at Marine Corps schools do not know Mike Hartley's name, but they teach his principle. Firepower matters, adaptability matters. Sometimes the heavy burden is the only thing keeping you from being blown away. The world forgot Bull Hartley's name, but every time a soldier refuses to leave gear behind because it might be useful, every time an engineer solves a problem, the manual says, cannot be solved, every time someone chooses the heavy tool over the light one because they know it will work, when everything else fails, the spirit of Target Hill lives on. Mike Hartley proved something on that ridge that still echoes. That American industry can be weaponized. That practical knowledge beats theoretical training. That one stubborn man with a wrench can change the outcome of a battle. The experts said the gun would not work, said it was too heavy, said the ground was too soft, said the whole idea was insane. They were wrong, and 200 Marines who walked off that ridge alive knew it. The Iron Pig fired its last rounds on December 26, 1943. The metal was melted down years ago, turned into steel beams for buildings or body panels for cars. The physical weapon is gone, but the lesson remains. Sometimes the junk everyone tells you to throw away is exactly what you need to survive. Sometimes the heaviest burden is the lightest price for staying alive, and sometimes, just sometimes, physics and mercy arrive at the same destination, even if they take different roads to get there. On quiet nights in Pennsylvania, if you listen carefully near the old steel mill, some people swear they can still hear it. Faint metallic roar, sound of brass hitting mud, Bull Hartley's gun, still firing, still holding the line, not because the gun exists, but because the story refuses to die. And as long as the story lives, so does the truth it carries. That ordinary men can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept the word impossible, that the best weapon is the one you have in your hands when you need it, that Tommy Hartley did not die in vain, because his brother made sure no other Marine would die the same way, not on his watch, not with that gun, never again.